o'clock noon. We are going to start with Molly. She can review all the names visible on the participant list for this meeting. If your name is not listed, please let us know. We do keep track of attendance for these meetings. So we have a good turnout today.
Sorry about that. I skipped slides. Okay, I will go ahead and read who I see. Jamie, will you please say your last name for me? Because I have a feeling I've not been saying it correctly and I want to hear it.
Oh, sure. It's Figueroa.
Okay, Jamie Figueroa, Sarah Blaylock, Mark Lohman, Craig Kissinger, Pete Leonard, Jennifer Harris, Jasmine Williams, Kylan Fisher, Monica Pruitt, Michael Massey, and Dan Kunert. That is who I see here. So we have a great group.
Thanks, Molly.
Mm-hmm.
Our next slide shows our agenda for today, and it is a pleasure to introduce Pete Leonard. Pete, is that a virtual background, or are you actually sitting in front of those coffee machines?
I am sitting in front of those coffee machines. Yes, no, it's not virtual at all. This is where my office is. Okay,
if you would introduce yourself and tell us about, it says success story singular, but Pete Leonard is somebody who has many success stories.
I do. I'll only share one. I have dozens, but my name is Pete Leonard, clearly. My company is I Have a Bean. We're a coffee roasting company in Wheaton, Illinois, just west of Chicago. I started this company back in 2007. Took 2 years to design and build our coffee roasting system and employed our first post-prison person in June of 2009. So it's the whole point of the company is post-prison employment. We've employed a little bit more than 60 post-prison people since we started. And I'm going to share a really brief synopsis of one person's story. His name is Lewis. I met Lewis 4 months after he got released from prison here in Illinois. Lewis was incarcerated as a 19-year-old young man. He was arrested for attempted murder. He shot a young man more times. What Lewis told me is there were more bullet holes in this kid that he shot than could be counted. Fortunately for Lewis and the young man, he did not die. Otherwise, Lewis would have been executed because the infraction took place actually in Missouri. So Lewis grew up in East St. Louis. His father was a drug dealer and a gang member, and his mother stayed at home. And I think the only other person in his life was his grandmother. Lewis did not know that his father was a drug dealer and a gang member until just before he got into high school. And when he discovered that, having looked up to his dad all those years prior, he decided that his dad was somebody that he needed to be more like. And so he went from being a stellar student, straight A student, to somebody getting involved in drug selling. He would steal drugs from his father's stash and sell them at school. He got involved in a gang, and his picture of what it was like to be a man was somebody who was tough, gun wielding, gang member, drug dealing, that kind of thing. It culminated, so his criminal career culminated in this daytime shooting of a young man outside a fast food store where Lewis held a part-time job. Lewis was sentenced to, at that time, life in prison. And while he was in prison, got convicted of 2 other crimes, and eventually his total sentence was 3 life terms plus 100 years in prison. When he first got into prison, I got to tell you this part, the lawyer who defended him at his trial clearly was not successful in keeping him out of prison. And there was supposed to be a time right after the trial where Lewis could meet with his lawyer in this small room. And it was going to be just him and his lawyer. And Lewis determined at that moment he was going to try and kill this lawyer because he didn't get him off. The lawyer must have sensed something, because he did not go into that room with Lewis, so he didn't get that opportunity. And Lewis was sent off to prison. The first place he went was a holding prison, while, it was only for a few weeks while they figured out where he was going to spend the first large portion of his 3 life terms plus 100 years. Lewis was stripped of everything that he had and given an orange jumpsuit. He had not even a pair of underwear, no socks, no underwear, no shoes, no toothbrush, no comb, no nothing, just an orange jumpsuit. And he was ushered into this big holding room that was where everybody went while they were trying to figure out where to put him. And he was shown a cot in the corner beneath the TV. And Lewis told me that he sat on the edge of his bunk and he looked around the room, and he figured that he didn't want to be owing anybody anything. He didn't want to be anybody's plaything in prison. And so he knew that the best way to do that was to find the biggest, meanest person there that he could and beat him up or kill him. And so that's what he did. He looked around the room, and while he was doing this, somebody walked up to him, unknown person, and put a copy paper box at his feet while he's sitting on the bunk. The man didn't say anything, a prisoner. He just put the copy paper box down and left. And Lewis watched where that guy went and saw where his bunk was, and then he kicked the lid off the copy paper box and looked inside, and there was a bunch of stuff that he needed: underwear, a comb, some socks, a toothbrush, all new stuff, and a bag of Skittles. And he remembers this because apparently you can trade Skittles in prison for other things. And so he looked at that, and he told me he looked inside that box and he thought, there is no way that I can repay this gift. And I don't want to be beholden to anybody in here. So that's the guy I'm going to kill. And he saw where that guy went, and that guy was in a cell that was, on the outside edge of the big room he was in. And there were no gates, no bars. It was a sheet hanging down for the entrance to this cell. Lewis said, that's the guy I'm going to kill. And he waited until, I think it was 11 p.m. When the TV, signal stopped and the lights went off, and Lewis waited another half an hour. And then he said he got up and walked around the room very quietly, got right outside that guy's cell. And he says he put his hands in this position because he didn't have a weapon. And so he's thinking, I'm going to go in and strangle that guy to death, and then nobody's going to mess with me. And he jumped through the curtain with his arms like this and stopped dead in his tracks. He didn't realize it, but there were actually 3 guys in that cell behind this sheet. And they were sitting around a table with a little lamp, and one of them was reading aloud scripture. And Lewis didn't know what to make of that. And they didn't jump up. They didn't bother with him. The guy reading just kind of glanced up and saw him there and kept on reading. And Lewis said he's standing there like a fool with his hands like this, intent on strangling this guy. And then the guy stopped reading, and he looked up at Lewis and he said, "Hey, Lewis, do you believe in Jesus?" And Lewis was like, "No." He says, here, take this. And he handed him a gospel tract. He said, take a look at this. And then they just dismissed him. And Lewis is like, one hand still like this, the other hand out to take the tract. And he's got the tract and the strangle hand. And he's like, he said, I felt so ashamed of myself. I couldn't kill the guy. I backed up out of the room and I went back to my bunk and read that tract. And Lewis tells me that night he became a believer in Christ, and his life totally changed from that moment on. So I'm going to fast forward through what ended up being 19 and a half years in prison. Unbeknownst to Lewis, his case came before the parole board, and they saw, and his the guy running the prison, the warden, testified at such a massive change in Lewis's life that the parole board decided to let him free, although he was sentenced to 3 life terms plus 100 years. I met Lewis 4 months after he got out of prison, and he met me at an event I was speaking at, and he came up to me afterwards. He said, "Mr. Leonard, my name is Lewis, and I'm going to work for you." Because I had just started I Have a Bean at the time. We were maybe a year into the business. Well, it just so happens that the person that I hired when I started the business to run our roasting operation had just gotten a job with People's Gas Corporation working on their trucks, because James, who that person was, had studied auto mechanics in prison and became a pretty good mechanic. And that's what he figured that he wanted to do. So he had gotten hired 2 weeks prior. He had given me his 2 weeks, or a week prior, he gave me his 2-week notice. So I had 1 week of James left, and I had nobody to replace him till Lewis came along. And so Lewis came in, he got a day of training on the roasting machine that I invented for this business, and started roasting. He roasted for me for about a year. And then he came to me one day, and Lewis has a personality that, will fill a stadium. He's very engaging talker, loves people and that kind of thing. And he said, "Pete, I love you and I love this business, but I'm tired of being back here all alone. I want to get out with people. Can I be in sales?" I'm like, "Sure, let's find somebody to replace you. You teach them how to roast coffee and we'll put you in sales." And so I did that, and he moved out into sales. He did that for me for another year and a half. And then he came to me and he said, "Pete, I love you and I love this business. I'll always be an ambassador for I Have a Bean, but I hate coffee." And Lewis to this day does not like coffee. And he said, "But when I was in prison, that tract that was given to me was produced by a company, a group called Emmaus Bible College. And I went through a lot of biblical training with them, read a lot of their books. And the guy that founded that organization and is running the Illinois branch of it is retiring. And they've asked me to come and lead that. And I think God's calling me to do that. So is that okay with you if I do that?" Yeah, that'd be great with me. So Lewis left, and he spent the next 5 years working with this group and leading it in Illinois. He actually has become essentially a missionary back into the prison system. He has been all over the United States in various prisons, in various schools, talking to youth before they have a chance to go to prison, and hoping to keep them out, talking to young men who are in prison, helping them understand what they need to do while they're in to be successful when they get out. And he started another not-for-profit that is working with the Warrenville Youth Detention Center, and is providing a home for those that qualify to come out and live with him and his wife, so they're not going back to the hood as part of their time in that system. So Lewis has become a very good friend of mine, he and his family, and he's running now 2 not-for-profits, and is living a life that he feels God has called him to do. So there's my success story. I think I probably took a little bit more time than I was supposed to. I'm sorry about that, but and it's just skimming the surface of Lewis's life. So that's probably our poster child for success stories at I Have a Bean.
Thank you. That is a wonderful success story. It is something that I think we can aspire to. It might be hard to have somebody like Lewis with actually multiple success stories, but we are going to move along to our charges and priorities. Molly, would you back up to slide 4 for a minute? This is, or maybe there it is, how we work together. And I think many of you have seen this before from being on our calls, in our meetings. This is very worthwhile. And if you have not seen it, I would encourage you just to contemplate it a little bit, but I'm not going to read it to you because it's available to you in the PowerPoint. We have our charges and priorities, and this is also something that most of you have seen before. It is organized in a fashion that each of our work groups are in alignment with the Career Pathways for Targeted Populations Committee and the Illinois Workforce Innovation Board. So this structure of charge, priorities with service integration, career pathways awareness, and continuous improvement is the same format and very similar from work group to work group. Our next slide is what we did in November. We reviewed examples of career pathways and priority pathways by Juan Gonzalez of Ed Systems, that's Northern Illinois University. We've discussed our barriers list, which is ongoing. We prioritized adding a committee member with lived experience, which is on the agenda for today. And we will finalize a work plan. And again, the PowerPoint has information on all of that Molly has provided us. So now we are fortunate to have a presentation by Jasmine Williams. And this is a very, very worthwhile presentation. So Jasmine, you can have the entire 15 minutes that you were allotted. Please introduce yourself before you start.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jasmine Williams, and I am a senior policy analyst at the partnership. Part of that role for me is studying things like labor market information. And I'm also really involved with our both internal and external data to just inform our policies, inform our programs, inform, the things that we go after or the things that we don't go after. So just to level set for this presentation, this was born out of a conversation between me and the staff that were working directly with returning citizens, and we were wanting to make some updates to the website. So I said, it would be great if I could come up with like a top 40 list for returning citizens, like what are the top places that they're working? And so I set about to start kind of Googling that, and I couldn't really find anything that seemed to be backed by evidence. I found some jobsforfelons.com, like some examples, but I really couldn't find anything that was, showing me statistically where are our returning citizens working. And then I remembered that, we have access to thousands and thousands of records in the partnership. So you can move to the next slide and I'll go a little bit deeper into what I did. So I looked at our WIOA exiters. At the time when I began this research, we were still in the middle of our 2022 program year. So the analysis is from July 1, 2016 to June 30th, 2021. So about a 5-year time frame. We had a little over 26,000 WIOA participants enrolled during this time frame. And of that, a little over 2,400 indicated that they were a returning citizen. So to keep in mind, I do not have information necessarily on what their background is, but if they are come in our system and indicate that they're a returning citizen, they do have to show some proof. Either a rap sheet or arrest record or something like that. So that represented little over 9% of our population. Next slide. So how many of those are we able to get employed? A little over 1,400. So when they exited the program, 1,400 had a job when they left. 1,077 had received a credential, and their average wage was $19.47 an hour. One interesting thing to note was that they don't necessarily spend a long time in the program. So the average time in the program was less than a year. So I thought that was just good to know that when you compare it to all WIOA participants, it was pretty close in number in terms of just average program time overall. Next slide, please. So we do look at retention after exit. So you'll notice a few of these numbers are a little bit wonky. At first I said a little like 1406. A little bit of data gets lost in translation. So of 1,378 returning citizens, sometimes if people have private things that happen, every once in a while we can get blocked from a few records post-exit. 1036 we're still working in the first quarter after exit, so that's 90 days. 962 we're still working 2 quarters after exit, and so forth and so on. So by the time we get to 4 quarters out, that's a full year away. 867 of those returning citizens we're still working. So again, this is just more so demographic data. What I was really wanting to get at was where are they working and what are they doing? But next slide.
So Jasmine, real quick, this is Craig Kissinger. Question on that. Can you go back, Molly? Sorry. I think what would be interesting as we look to have conversations with companies like, well, obviously we don't have to have that conversation with I Have a Bean, but the National Tube Supplies of the world, other employers, these are awesome statistics. How do they compare to the other 24,000 people that went through WIOA? You know what I'm saying? So, because one of the things that I talk about is, look, you're no more at risk for turnover or violence or anything with the returning citizens. In fact, you may be more successful with the returning citizen than you are Joe Blow off the street that you know nothing about, right? So I just think it'd be interesting if you don't have that. I'd love for us to connect. I'd love to see that and be able to share that with the group as we look to talk about awareness.
Mm-hmm. No,
Thank
that
you.
that actually is that's a great point. That is not information that I have on hand, but certainly information I could easily.
Yeah, because you could see where that could be a powerful statement.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Thank you.
No, that's a great point. So you can move to the next slide. So these are just some of the demographics. And in here, I'm just kind of comparing like the total returning citizen population to those that were employed. Returning citizen, do they have to be completely off parole? No, they don't. No, we serve many people who are currently on parole. Now, are some of their opportunities possibly limited, especially when you get into the transportation business, with truck driving being a very popular industry? There can be some limitations with those who can't leave the state, but you absolutely can still be on parole, and even house arrest if you have movement. if you have, like daytime movement or movement a few days a week, we work with people because sometimes once you get employed, you can get even more movement. So just to see the demographics, I won't read through them. It's just race, gender, and then in the next slide, we have the ages. So you can see our largest age group is that 30 to 39 age group. But 40 to 49 is also pretty, has pretty high numbers when we group these returning citizens by age. If you move to the next slide, and then here we see our education levels. And so I didn't really have a predetermined, I wasn't sure what I was going to get, but we find that the majority of returning citizens in our system have a secondary diploma or secondary school equivalency. You see 826 and 455, that's the majority, of that group. So that's just something to keep in mind. The next slide. So these 10 communities in Chicago are 10 communities where we have some of the biggest rates of violence, and they have been targeted by the city for just violence prevention. So in the midst of kind of sharing this information with them, with the city of Chicago, I pulled this and just figured I would kind of leave it in there. And you can kind of see just in these communities, these high violence, unfortunately, communities where a lot of returning citizens, end up returning to, you can kind of see how many people we served in that community, how many were placed, how many of those were returning citizens, and then how many were placed. And you see that less than 11. So due to our data agreement, we cannot report on statistics in numbers of less than 11. So if it was 8, 9, we just have to say less than 11. So that is just, for your information. So now let's get to, in the next slide, let's dig into where they are working. So the top industries, when we group everything by industry, basically I looked at every reported employment by that returning citizen that was reported to us. So transportation was the big winner. 39% of returning citizens ended up in the transportation industry, with manufacturing closely following with 28%. Other than that, you're also seeing construction, food and retail, small amount of other community and social services. So I have examples, I have actual job titles from these people in the next few slides. So if you can move to the next slide. Oh, and before we kind of list all of the job titles, these were the employers that were hiring the most returning citizens. So these employers came up at least 5 times on our list. So you do see some, you see a lot in the, transportation and manufacturing and staffing. Those last 3 companies are staffing agencies, but I didn't want to leave them out because statistically they were up there. So those are our top employers. So I think that that's worth, remembering and highlighting. And next slide. And after this, you just have broken down by each industry the job titles that I was seeing. So these are actual job titles. Internally, I was able to provide our business services team with a list of employers who had hired them. So that was, for the purposes of them outreaching those employers, like build stronger relationships with them, ensure they see if they need any tools. Do they need any training dollars? Do they need anything to continue the work that they're already doing? So in food and retail, common job titles: retail store associate, line cook, site manager, butcher, etc. Move to the next slide. Again, all of these slides now are just actual job titles for people who have indicated some type of background. So even in business professional services, customer service, billing coordinator, auditors, paralegal, some of these things you would think are things that returning citizens cannot do, but keep in mind, someone could have had a misdemeanor, or an open case when they came to us, and that would count as justice system involvement. In the next slide, and I'm wrapping up. These are, again, just the specific job titles from each category. So there were some who went into community and social services and became basic skills facilitators and community health workers and substitute teachers and housing specialists. Not everyone requires, the same background check. So people have been able to find success. And a few more slides. Next slide, please. Construction, bricklayer, carpenter, laborers, contractors, estimators, flaggers. So again, I won't read each one of these. Next slide. Healthcare. So again, without knowing exactly the nature of each crime, just knowing that they indicated it, some people were actually able to become registered nurses, pharmacy technicians, medical assistants, home care aides, etc. And I think we just have 3 more categories: manufacturing, now 2 more, manufacturing and IT. So manufacturing was a very big one for us. So you see those titles listed before you. And then finally, I'm sorry, IT and transportation. Thank you, Molly. So we have some people who have technology skills, transportation being the biggest industry with lots and lots of people being truck drivers. That was by far the biggest category. And then finally, other. There was an other category. So these are just some custodial positions: groundskeeper, personal trainer, swim instructor, meter readers. And that really concludes my research on this. I did see a question in the chat. Happy to take any questions or comments or thoughts for how to make this stronger, because now that we've done another program year, I think that this type of analysis is kind of worth doing for all of our special populations. But I wanted to starting with returning citizens. I think they face some of the largest barriers, but also looking at persons with disabilities and also looking at our opportunity youth. Okay, Craig, you're interested. And we had some, I think I can get a hold to some of that data, Craig. When we were preparing for a grant that we have right now, we were able to find out that, like, this was at the county level though. You do kind of have to look at it like, okay, where are they coming from? Are they coming from prison? Are they coming from Cook County? So we kind of did an analysis of Cook County. We saw that 80% of the population was going back to like 15 zip codes in Chicago. So what does the 2000?
Yeah, so just trying to figure out, how many justice involved people, particularly returning citizens, right? If IDOC is, we just had a conversation with IDOC in Will County, right? And we were talking, they said a lot of them do return to Cook County because of available housing and transportation, where the collar counties housing and transportation are a large barrier, right? So with that many returning to Cook County, I'm curious how many are actually getting served with WIOA? Because to your point, a lot of them probably qualify, and are they aware of the benefit, right? And sorry, my phone's ringing, it cuts off my headphone. How they could get upskilled to gain access to employment, right? Because I'll tell you, being an HR practitioner, the observation that I made with all those wonderful titles is there's a lot of placeability, right? That there's a lot of job opportunities out there that these individuals, based on their KSAs, right, knowledge, skills, and attitude, what that could apply for different jobs. And probably it's a perception, it's an awareness issue, right? So I'm just curious, again, do 10,000 get released and 2,000 take advantage? I don't know.
Right. Right. And we have the most extensive information on those that we actually register. So those that,
Absolutely, but
yeah.
it'd be interesting, again, to me, it's all government, it's agency,
Mhm.
bumping up that data really, in my eyes, I'd be curious of the feedback from others. Does that really help tell a story? Right. For me, it's meaningful of how many people we're impacting. Is there could we do a better job educating justice involved individuals to WIOA programs?
Mhm.
So I like data.
For sure. No, and that's good. I think that is something that I could know. Yeah, nice point, Jamie. And I'm happy to kind of share kind of the steps that I looked at, the steps that I looked at. But basically, everyone who had that returning indicator flag, we have a bunch of barriers in WIOA. So some people say that they are, basic skills deficient. Some people say that they are, a parents and youth, and some people say that they're a returning citizen. So just matching all of those people against all of the employment data over those 5 years. Just matching it. And then at that point, it's just grouping it. Because when they put in the employment data, we already have the occupation codes. So we're already able to kind of group by industry. So a little bit of legwork on just the grouping and sorting and cleaning, because there were so many records. But overall, it was pretty simple.
Okay, are those the same categories as the Bureau of Labor Statistics uses, the BLS?
I think BLS has more.
Okay,
I think they have more.
I didn't know this is a new area for me, so I wasn't sure when looking at industry categories, what's.
Oh, like the NAICS codes. So it's.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, those are the same. Yes.
And what was the word that you used? I'm sorry.
NAICS.
Okay,
Jamie,
thank you.
that's the North American industry code that every company is. Yeah, every company. And then there's the OX code that to your point, BLS categorizes jobs under.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Jasmine, I think the work that you did there, that is awesome work. And I love the fact that we're getting that into the hands of our, the business representatives and the people who are meeting face to face with businesses and with employers and probably customers of the workforce system. So
thank you so much. Any other questions or comments? Feel free to reach out to me. I could have put my contact information on here, but feel free to reach out to me if you have questions or suggestions. I did kind of take the notes from the things that you all did mention, but love to keep this conversation going and figure out ways to make this, condense this, make this more useful for, dissemination or motivation for people who feel like, oh, what am I going to do? I'm a felon, or what, how they might see themselves. But would love to, say these are actual jobs that actual people have.
Well, and I think, Dan, you expressed it. And Mark, I'm wondering if maybe it's a side conversation of, with Molly and Sarah, who could we talk to at the state level that, Jasmine has done this for, Chicago Cook Partnership, right? Jamie's curious about Dan is here. If we know from IDOC, people go all over the place, right? But if they go to the Chicago metropolitan, area, St. Louis metropolitan, what are those? What do those look like? Maybe somebody at the state level, or what a great research project for somebody like at SIU, a stats T, utilizing some of the people we partner with, Mark, that could be some good, powerful information from an advocacy standpoint. I don't know. Does anybody else think that that would be useful or helpful?
Students are, yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. I would just say, as we look at those, I was actually surprised by the retention rates. And so I think that anything that we could do around that in terms of some of those priorities we talked about, of businesses being leery about hiring justice involved citizens. I love that. I think to Craig's point about the data, I think that's really powerful. And I would love to see us, if possible, really promote that. Maybe we can dig down deeper, but as a recruiter, anybody that stays in a job over a year is extremely successful, right? Especially in some of the jobs we looked at, right? Those are entry-level careers, those are difficult jobs. So, I mean, if you looked at the opportunities that they have, which are limited, and the fact that they are staying for a year, I think that's really, really powerful.
Thank you, Jennifer. I do want to make one point about the way that we capture retention. So for us, it just means that you are employed somewhere. It doesn't necessarily mean that you are employed in
And that's okay. I mean, if they are, and I don't know if I'm saying the right word, but in the mainstream, if they have realized the value of work, the power of work, if that's keeping them on track, if they got a better job, the fact that they're still earning after a year, I think that's important. It really is. And I think it's valuable for employers to see.
Right. I mean, we heard that great story that Pete shared, right? That person who wasn't that entire time, but he transitioned jobs, and it made sense why he left and where he moved on. So how many people do we know that either don't go get a job? That's why I'm curious of how many people were released to Chicago Cook, right?
Yeah, and the flip side is true for the actual individual to say, look, there's 800 people that are still working a year after they were released. It's not impossible, right? There are opportunities,
Right.
And there's 800 people that are doing it. Again, I mean, I think that you could use it two ways.
Thank you, Jasmine. That was wonderful. One of the questions in the chat, Jamie, you asked, returning citizens' participation in WIOA, do they have to be completely off parole? Definitely not. We have used our WIOA adult formula funds for occupational training while they are individuals in custody. We've used it after they've become returning citizens, but are still on parole. And recently we were awarded a QUEST grant, which is a national dislocated worker grant. And we're going to be using that for the same thing. One of the challenges of using adult formula funds is that historically, most local areas find it very easy to spend adult funds, and you can't get more of them. But with dislocated worker funds, you can request more. And so the United States Department of Labor, working with the Illinois Department of Commerce, now one of the populations that can be used, or that formula, or that national dislocated worker funding can be used for, is people in custody and returning citizens. And then of course, after they're no longer on parole, obviously they can still qualify. Is that what you were looking for, Jamie?
Yes, thank you.
All right.
And this is Dan. I just thought something was really interesting about that point about WIOA helping folks with trainings, and occupational certifications and so forth, while they're still in custody, they're still on parole, just from my perspective as somebody who does expungement and sealing work, because when people try to get their criminal records sealed, there's a waiting period from completion of the last sentence, but they can actually waive that if they've completed a job certification or a higher level of education or something while serving the sentence. So it's actually better for them to get those certifications while they're actually in some way, whether it's on parole or in custody, serving the sentence rather than to do it afterwards, just from my very particular niche of expungement and CLE law. So I just thought that was fascinating and it's something I kind of want to think some more about. So thank you for that.
And one of the things that the timing is definitely important, because we have put people through welding training inside the facility. We've put the people through welding training who are eligible to go outside the facility during the day, but we don't put them into training if they have years to go before their mandatory supervised release or parole. Because if you learn welding, even at a high level, and you get a credential and you get certified by the American Welding Society, then if you don't use it for months or years, you're not going to be a very effective welder when you get out. So it's difficult to time, but we do try to put people through occupational training when there is a likelihood that they will get out soon and be able to put it into use. All right, moving right along. In the PowerPoint that you were sent, we want to just take a quick few minutes to finalize our barriers and solutions list. And so that was prepared for us by Molly, and contains all the text that we've talked about. It's a good color graphic, and perhaps Molly put on the PowerPoint, finalize it. I kind of think of it as a living document. So if we come back to it in the future and add to it, but it's three PowerPoint slides. And I guess at this point, I just want people's opinion if we're capturing what we need to capture. And again, we can add to it in the future, but the first PowerPoint just talks about negative stigma, legal barriers, partnerships with employers and candidates, housing and healthcare and transportation, integration of policy, lack of digital literacy, social connections, post-release. Then the next slide, and it probably doesn't make sense for me to just read it to you because you can see it. Many of you have suggested some of these or have been involved in putting this together. And then we, the last PowerPoint slide of the three, and we're going to talk about this a little more at length and see if we have ideas, adding a committee member with lived experience. But going forward with best practices through webinars, developing materials, hosting tours. So is this, do I have general agreement that this is what we've already talked about, not limiting it to how it might evolve in the future? Anybody comments, questions?
Well, the only thing that I'm looking at this and thinking about is kind of like what we're doing in Will County, and Mark, you've already done a lot of work in this area. You know the uphill battle it was getting Kewanee to where it is today, right? In terms of a policy change behind the scenes, the only other thing that I could think of that could be on here is as we move down this road, right? As we were talking about, we talked with Stateville and members of Jennifer Perrick's team about the pre-release program. It's still very hard for employers that are interested to get into a lot of different facilities, to do training, to do interviews, to do whatnot, that I think part of what the work that I'd like to see us done is maybe on the policy side, right?
Yeah.
Of how do we, this is what we do outwardly, in public, if you will. But I think on the back end, I'm hoping we'll gather enough information that can help break down some of the bureaucracy at IDOC to help them make some of the changes that they're openly talking, hey, we need to make these changes. It's just slow to change.
Mhm.
To be able to say, hey, hurry up. The world needs this. The world wants this. So let's make these changes safely, but quicker.
And that message needs to be communicated over and over. And just hang in there, because even with repetitive communication, you might get frustrated with the continuing slowness. Like long before the pandemic started, we wanted internet access for individuals in custody, and we got it, but it took 1.5 years to go through the state of Illinois, the various departments of government, and and now it's been rolled out in other institutions around the state, and it's just it's not perfect, and the individuals that use the internet do it under supervision, because they can't have access to everything, but at least they finally have it for accessing workforce resources, college resources, even commercial job resources like Indeed or Monster or whatever. So yes, and that's also in the chat. We have policy and also policy/advocacy. So that is definitely something that should be added. A question, do we have a committee member who is an insider with the Illinois Department of Corrections? Yes, we do. Jennifer Perrick is a member of this work group. Her engagement is very sincere, but her work has her doing a lot. And so she is not always able to join these meetings, but she is approachable and is responsive. The idea of having a retired guard, there would be that's certainly an interesting concept. We think of lived experience as somebody who's been in prison. We think of somebody who is, and in fact, the Department of Corrections now has the ability to do WebEx meetings. It might be a little challenging and too far outside the box to think of having an individual in custody be a part of this, but somebody who's on parole or has been released, that type of lived experience. The parole officer or parole agent, what I found, and this goes back before the pandemic, but I started engaging parole agents, and it was easy for me to find out who was going to be the parole agent for an individual when they were released. And I will say my batting average was about 500. And if I was a Major League Baseball player, that would be amazing. But I was I was very encouraged by the people who engaged with us. And I was very discouraged by the 50% who said, that's not my job. And wouldn't really have anything to do with us, even though I could argue and show evidence how it improves parole outcomes, but and now the parole system has social workers in parole offices, not to be bad mouthing parole agents. Their offices are their cars, and they spend a lot of time out in the world, but now they have social workers. And again, this is something that I think Jennifer Perrick was instrumental in implementing, and I've met some of them as well. And that's probably a good resource for all of us to engage the social worker who then interacts with all of the parole agents or parole officers. Molly is going to email us the work plan. Does anybody have any suggestions on specific individuals that we might want to ask? And Molly, I think you've referred to it in the singular. If we had a couple of people that we thought we could engage, I know the work group isn't intended to be gigantic, but we could, unless there's some reason to limit it, we could probably have a couple, could we not? Couple people, especially if we're going to engage somebody from parole or corrections as one type of lived experience, and then somebody who's a returning citizen as the type of lived experience I think we were talking about the most.
Yeah, Mark, there is no limit on the side. We know what works well, but I think that's up to you and I. I think we want to add people that add value to the discussion. Yeah. And I think what I'm hearing from the group, these are individuals that would add value, right? Which is more important than the size of the group. It's those that will add value to the group, right? And help us move the ball forward.
Okay. So Molly, the next slide is the work plan, which work plan review and feedback, which you're going to mail out. Mm-hmm. And then the next slide is our next meeting will be January the 3rd. And we have set these meetings to be on a regular basis. That is going to be the first day back from a holiday, but I think our intent was we want to be regular and consistent and not have these meetings bounce around on the calendar. Molly, it's 1 o'clock.
Yeah, and then the last thing I had, sorry, for whatever reason, the slide won't stay when I push your slide. It'll only stay this way right now. So we're just gonna roll with it. But the last thing on here that you had wanted to mention, Mark, was the returning residents clean energy job training program.
Yes. And Molly sent that out to everybody. So you should have had an email from Molly. And those listening sessions are for anybody and everybody. And so I would encourage you to look that over and consider participating in a listening session for that. Does anyone have any comments, anything for the good of the group? Any announcements?
So the only announcement that I have is similar to I Have a Bean. I recently found out about Mod Pizza,
Mhm.
and I went and ate there last Friday before going downtown. And for any of these work groups, if you have a chance, look up Mod Pizza's who they're about, their website and who they're about. Right on their website, talking about it all starts with hiring. They specifically address all three of the targeted populations. So they specifically cater to those. So unfortunately the general manager was not around. I dropped off a business card and talked to the team captain, just so we can approach more businesses, Mark. So as you go on about life, if you hear about other great businesses like Pete's, please continue to share those, so that we can continue to connect with them, and even if they're not part of this formal group, we could possibly use them as a best practice, or maybe just a meeting to help. How did you go about doing what you do? Because a lot of employers struggle with that. So
And Mod
Yeah, and
Pizza.
Mod Pizza is really good,
Yes.
actually.
it was
Yeah.
It's good tasting
amazing.
pizza.
I loved it.
It
We'll
is.
be going back.
It is
Yep.
based in Seattle, I believe.
Yes.
And there is a significant presence in the Chicagoland area. It was one of the, I think it might have been the CEO, but one of the Seattle-based officers of the country did a presentation during Chicago Cook Workforce Partnership Hire Call.
Okay.
And that might be a recording that is still posted. Jasmine has left our meeting, but we can find out. And that would be, if you've never seen the hire calling recording or didn't do it when it was live, I would encourage you to look at that as well.
Cool.
Thank you, everybody. Enjoy your holidays, and
Yep.
if you have some time off, and we will reconvene at the beginning of January.
Thanks, everyone. Merry
Okay.
Christmas.
Merry
And
Christmas.
I'll email it out, but I just put a link to that higher calling recording in the chat. So if you
Okay.
want.
Thank you, Molly. You know
Thanks,
me.
Molly.
Send it in an email.
You're
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.